So the first example was with a hotel chain that's based in Atlanta, Georgia. And what they were doing basically was they're going through a major rebranding effort. So the work that they wanted to apply Scrum to was things like getting case goods in and redoing tile and choosing colors and actually doing the work necessary to actually move a physical hotel that you would sleep in into kind of this new branding model that they wanted to do. Does that make sense? Okay. And so you imagine that's a really interesting application for Scrum, right? Like, how would you even do that, right? And then so the second one was a fast food restaurant that gave us a call. And we still work with this one a little bit here and there. And they're really interested in Agile. And as you might imagine, like most companies, they do a fair amount of software. And they do Agile in a traditional software context. But they also have a lot of interest in being able to apply Agile into things like supply chain management or new product development, things like burgers or chicken sandwiches or whatever, right? How do they refactor their kitchens to put more equipment into the same footprint? How do they redesign kitchen fryers so that they take up a smaller space without changing the nature of the food? Okay? And you think about it and you gotta go, well, how would I apply Scrum to that, right? It's a really fascinating thing. And so I think that there's some stuff, right? But the pattern that we're getting is that people that are considering, they've heard about the benefits of Agile in software. They know somebody that's doing Agile in software. And so they call up and they want to do Agile, but they usually ask for Scrum training. Okay, does that make sense? So that's kind of like the pattern. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we kind of begin to break this down. So opportunities and challenges, right? So there's some, if we want to try to apply Agile, we want to try to apply Scrum into a non-IT context, there's kind of an upside and there's kind of a downside. And the upside is we can get clarity, we can get accountability, we can get measurable progress. Big fan of Dan Pink's drive, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. One of the things I don't think we talk about enough in Scrum, and I often when I'm doing like the big 3 things talk, I'll really link it explicitly. But the idea of a team, right, that gives us the ability to own something, right? The ability to have autonomy, not to have to coordinate with everybody. Dependencies get in the way of that. Definition of done is mastery. We get to say this was finished, right? We get to be able to claim victory. Purpose, the backlog is ties us to the objectives of the organization. And one of the things that's kind of neat is that it's kind of neat and bad at the same time. Dan Pink's hypothesis in his book Drive is that if we have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, it gives us kind of meaning for coming to work. We only work for, we want to get paid fairly and we want to have enough to take care of our families. But at the end of the day, right, we want autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? That's kind of the point of his book. and it's really pretty straightforward to tie teams, backlogs, working tested software, and what we're trying to do in Scrum to this autonomy, mastery, purpose idea. And so it's really pretty powerful when you link it to just kind of human nature and what we're trying to do as knowledge workers. The other side, the dark side of it, is when we don't do those things, right? We don't give people autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and we begin to struggle, okay? And so autonomy, mastery, purpose, transparency, trust, collaboration. And this is where we start to get into thinking about how to apply Agile and Scrum into non-IT contexts. Because what you find is when you're dealing with physical goods, where there's lag in lead times, when you're dealing with trucks moving things around, or hardware that has to be merged maybe with software, or you're dealing with product development in a tangible world, right, prototypes and things. It's really difficult. Like, what are we going to form a team around? Okay, what would that look like for a team to be autonomous and have the ability to produce something of value at the end of the sprint? Not saying it's impossible in maybe like a small design team, but in these complex things that we're trying to do, right, case goods into a rebranded hotel at the right time, the trucks have to arrive and the designs have to be done and the sign-offs have to happen and the lead times have to occur, right? What does it mean to get to the end of delivery at the end of the sprint? What does it mean when backlogs are emergent? Like, we have to figure out how to deliver on time, but what we don't really have is we don't really have an idea of what the backlog is. Sometimes these decisions are being made continuously as we go. Non-agile partners in your supply chain. Okay, that's like a classic software waterfall, agile waterfall kind of a thing. But if you've got non-agile partners in your supply chain, what do you do with that? Okay, external dependencies, and then, you know, absolutely hard dates. Okay, so what we're doing is we're starting to build a conceptual argument for how do we get the benefits of the manifesto? How do we leverage the practices in Scrum or even some of the other Agile frameworks, understanding that the ecosystem necessary to sustain those doesn't necessarily exist. Create a system of delivery that allows some of the benefits of Agile, maybe most of the benefits of Agile, while respecting the necessary constraints of the organization around us. Okay, so that's the key. Respecting the necessary constraints of the organization around us. In non-IT contexts, large-scale physical goods, some of those constraints are necessary, and we can't pretend they don't exist. Okay? And this is the key insight, and I apologize, I just want to apologize for the slide, but schedules, milestones, and budgets establish constraints within which decisions and trade-offs are made. And I'm going to say top-level plans can be flow-based or schedule-based. So what we observe is that, I'm just going to say this in shorthand, project plans are often necessary and required. Okay? So that's a set of constraints. Okay? And most projects operate within constraints. One of my favorite quotes was, and this is starting to be 20 years old now at this point, when George Lucas re-released all the Star Wars movies. One of the greatest quotes he ever said is he goes, great movies are never finished, they're only abandoned. You remember he like changed the movies at one point, he got an opportunity to come back and do it, right? So there's deadlines. I've got to be in market. I only have so much money. I've got to get all the marketing and everything around it, and it's got to be in the theaters on a certain day, right? So there's this top level that's constraints, okay? It can be plan-driven constraints, or they can be flow-based constraints or investment constraints. And this is really key to what we're getting ready to talk about. Prioritizing, sequencing, and validating decisions is the effort of a cross-functional collaborative team. Decisions are informed and constrained by the top-level plan. Decisions are the currency of delivery. So I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. In any given project, and I would say this is probably true of IT projects as well, but especially non-IT projects, there is a plan. The problem that we have in delivering against those plans is just the same problem we have in software, is that our understanding of the work that needs to be done is imperfect. Okay? And the problem is that because it's imperfect, and when we have a more waterfall or sequential kind of metaphor for doing the work, the feedback loops and the latency periods in decision making is too long. Okay? And so what we want to do is we want to amplify and increase collaboration where decisions get made, where requirements are defined. As our emerging understanding of what it is that we're building is revealed to us, we want to use that to inform not only the execution on the ground, but also what the top-level plan is. And so this idea that decisions are the currency of delivery, when we start getting into this a little bit more, what I'm going to propose, I'm hypothesizing with you, is that decisions are kind of the backlog of the Agile team. Okay? So Agile really lives in the decision-making layer rather than in the execution layer. And then execution can be managed using Agile, iterative and incremental, or plan-driven models. Deliverables are measured and assessed against the near-term milestones. So you have a set of constraints, you have a continuous flow of decisions, and then you've got the people on the ground that are doing the work. They're driving trucks, they're moving stuff around, they're hauling crap between one place and another, right? They're building a piece, they're doing something, right? And so their actual execution on the ground and their actual progress, whatever methodology that they're using, right, is going to inform the decision-making process. Okay? And then the last line is that feedback loops link the various levels of planning to provide feedback against portfolio objectives. Okay? So I'm going to give you guys a visual on that, right? Because I know that's a lot of words and that's a lot of big thoughts. Okay? So the model is basically this. Establish constraints at the top layer, and especially if you're doing it was aerospace or something like that, you're going to have Gantt charts, right? You're gonna have plans. You're gonna have stuff that links together. Okay, so as an aspiring agilist in that kind of context, like let's just not fight that battle. Okay, what we want to do is we want to have a really solid mechanism for collaborating, responding to change, respecting people, getting feedback, right? All the things in the manifesto. Okay, so the top level is constraints. The middle layer is a decision-making queue, and then the lowest layer is just executing kind of however we try to get there. Okay? So I'm going to show you guys two models that we kind of walk through. One's based on more of a waterfall style governance, and one's based on more of kind of a design thinking style governance. Right? So the first one, the model that we put together, this is for the hotel chain doing the case goods, right? What was really hard with those guys was figuring out what the unit of value was that they were trying to move forward. And if you really think about it, the unit of value, the thing that they could make money off of, was a converted hotel. Okay, because that's when we go from old brand, go to new brand, people can sleep in it. And one of the things that's really fascinating is I have a friend that that owns a franchise of a pretty major national chain restaurant, and it was really interesting. They were going through a rebranding effort, very similar to this, but in a different context. And the lady plays, like her kids play lacrosse with my kids, and so we spend a lot of time on the lacrosse field talking. And I think what she does is fascinating. And she was talking about how at the end of 2017, they actually had to save money because they wanted to be able to pay their employees during the rebrand time, right, when the store was going to be closed. That meant that they had to save X number of thousands of dollars, and if they didn't get the rebrand done before the end of the year, that would be taxable income, and then they'd have to go save more money the next year, right? So they had like a real human constraint that they had to be done by the end of 2017 so that they could pay the people with 2017 dollars and then, you know, not have that carry over and get taxed. Okay, so just real life stuff, right? And so, you know, so these hotel operators had very similar kinds of constraints. They were going to be largely out of business, so they wanted to do the rebrands during downtime. They wanted to do it during slow seasons, right? Whatever, that kind of a thing. And so once we identified that the transformed hotel was the unit of value, they also recognized that they had hotel operators that were willing to go to market with maybe less than perfect designs or things that might need to be reworked later, right? So they had hotel operators that were more willing to take risk, and then hotel operators that were less willing to take risk, right? Early adopters versus late adopters, right? Some of the late adopters wanted to see what the other folks were going to do. Right, so this is a real oversimplification, but what we did is we basically sequenced the property and the operators and the case goods and the marketing, right, based upon the nature of the hotel rooms, whether they had ADA compliant rooms, whether they had trundle beds, whether they had suites, whether they had whatever, right? And we used the sequencing, the roadmap of the hotels and all of the other decisions that need to be made, and we kind of like would draw a line through it. And we'd say, okay, this set of decisions needs to be made now, this set of decisions can be made next month, this set of decisions can be made the month after that. So what we did is we used their plans to sequence the decisions that had to be made so that they could get the work flowing through the system. Okay? So this at the top was very heavily Gantt chart kind of focused. But the cool thing is that they're really smart people, and they're actually pretty high in the organization. They recognize, and this is where we get in trouble with Gantt charts. It's not that a Gantt chart's bad, it's just that we believe the Gantt chart to be true, right? And if we recognize that it's not true, but represents a set of constraints that we need feedback against, then we can use the Gantt chart for good instead of evil. Right? It's not a stick to beat up the team, right? It's a published artifact of constraints, okay? And so what we did is we'd figure out what decisions needed to be made. And we created a queue, a backlog of decisions. And what's fascinating is that the cross-functional team that we built was made up of like literally architects, designers, case good people, facilities people, and there was about 9 people that represented all of those different groups. They all had teams that they went off and interacted with, but we had this team of people that were authorized to make decisions. Okay? And that was one of their biggest problems at the time, is that all these people were operating using handoffs. And then the architects were like, no, I can't. And you've heard this before, right? No, I can't let go any of decisions until I've made all the decisions. And then, the people are like, well, we want to do all the case goods at one time because we need economies of scale, or, it's just really just very similar to what we deal with in software. So what we did is we used the constraints, we created a backlog of decisions, and then we, in effect, operated like a Scrum team, right, on a cadence, daily stand-ups, reviews, retrospectives, all that stuff, but we really kind of did like a Scrumban, right? So we had those decisions in a continuous flow type queue. So these group of people would operate like a Scrum team, meet every day, do daily stand-ups, right, work together, collaborate, but their goal was to get decisions moved across the board as fast as they possibly could. Okay? So as those decisions were being made, they would feed the activity queue of all the different groups that they were working with. Right, whether it be the group that they were working with to order the materials from China, or whether it be the trucking companies, or whether it be the project managers that were driving the engagements within the hotels themselves, the marketing and brand teams, right? So you think about the complexity, all the different like non-IT functions that had to go, right? What those guys needed is they didn't need like a big overall plan, they needed clarity on what to go do. And they could receive that in smaller batches. And we didn't care how they managed their work, right? They just basically had to get this stuff done, right? And so what would happen is that as these guys did the activities in Scrum or Waterfall or just showing up, right? Work orders, right? What have you, their progress would feed back to the team that was making the decisions about prioritization and sequencing. And then the team that was making decisions about prioritization and sequencing would go back and inform the waterfall Gantt chart set of constraints. So we could prioritize decisions based upon risk and everything up here. The execution would then inform the decisions. And then if the plans had to change, this group was the one that communicated changes to the Gantt chart. Okay? So the thing that was most like Scrum or Agile, right, was this middle tier, right? People and interactions over processes and tools, right? All those people were sitting in a room, things up on the whiteboard, Kanban boards, blue tape, sticky notes, flip chart paper, right? Very agile in the way that it looked. Working software over comprehensive documentation. They were able to get decisions made in real time so that we could free these guys up to go do the work, right? And we didn't get into decision paralysis. Contract negotiation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? They weren't trying to define everything with the case good providers up front. They were trying to make just enough decisions to get prototypes back, collaborating with the people out in the field, right? The ability to respond to change over following a plan, right? So they were able to get the heart and soul of Agile, leverage some of the stuff from Scrum and Kanban in the middle tier, maybe even leverage some Scrum techniques down at the execution level, right? But then, without being dogmatic about process or process framework, achieve the manifesto goals and achieve some agility. Right? And what was cool is we were able to get them like unlocked. It was really that decision-making layer that's always the problem, is bringing people to the table to decide. So case study number 2. Pretty much the same thing, except that the top level governance was not plan-driven. Okay, it was more design thinking driven. It was more investment driven. And so the interesting challenge that we had here is that the client that we were working with had gone through a 10-year development cycle to put something on the menu. Okay? And what was interesting about it is they're like, well, how can we shorten that to where it's faster than 10 years? Okay? That sounds funny when you actually say it, but yeah. No, but you're right. Okay, so how can you get that to go faster than 10 years? Here's the interesting thing, right? So that particular brand is absolutely meticulous about the taste and quality and kind of brand integrity of its food. And so The definition of done is whether the owner liked it and thought it matched their brand identity. It's probably not exactly perfect, but think about that. That's an incredibly imprecise thing. My team deals with it all the time. Well, I'll know it when I see it, or it'll be done when I like it. I mean, it's like, what does that mean, And the reality is that when it comes to taste and food and things like that, the definition of done is subjective. So one of the things that we kind of teased out as we were trying to figure out like what the unit of value is that they didn't necessarily need the design process to be shorter. What they needed to do was more explicitly manage their investments. Okay, to decide how much are we willing to do, how much are we willing to spend, how far are we willing to go in a very explicit way to be able to produce this new menu item. And so the concept that we had is we had kind of this idea of budgets and investments rather than timelines. And so what they would do is very much like a design thinking, lean startup kind of a thing. I have a hypothesis that I can produce a new sandwich for my menu, and I am willing to spend X amount of dollars, apply this team to it for 3 months to validate that hypothesis. So that team works together, right? That token drops down into here. They figure out how they're going to run it through the test kitchen, how they're going to get owner-operators to taste the food, how they're going to get the owners to make decisions, how they're going to engage the populace, right? All those different physical things that have to happen. And so they design that. And then they broke the process of building a new sandwich into a backlog of decisions. Right, just like what we talked about, okay? And so what they would do is that they would have that 3-month investment increment, okay? They would spend some time understanding and imagining. That would cause it to break down and to turn into backlogs of decisions, right? Those decisions would get built, right? And then as the chicken sandwich became like a real thing, okay, what they would do is that they would then feed back up, right, the progress they were making. And then somewhere along the way, they'd get up here and they would validate whether that sandwich was the right product for them. Okay? And then what we did is we put in like a couple gates. It was like, okay, do we want to continue? Right? Because maybe we don't like it, but we think we're getting closer, so therefore we're just going to loop back through, we're going to make another investment and we're going to continue it. Or we realize that we don't like the product that we're building at all and we want to pivot and go into a different product area. Or maybe we've been at this for a couple years and we decide that we've invested enough and we're just going to cut our losses and we're going to kill the project. Okay? So it was very much like a lean, you can manage that in a lean Kanban-based flow. You can use the design thinking kinds of ideas. You can use the lean startup kinds of ideas to figure out how to validate hypothesis, pivot, kill it, right? That kind of a thing. So, but that queue of ideas or that queue of hypotheses that need to be validated would drive the decisions that had to be made to orchestrate the work. And then teams that were doing real physical things would get engaged and basically be assigned work orders to go do stuff based upon their performance and their ability to get stuff done. That would feed back into the decision queues, and the decisioners would make trade-offs within the constraints. And once they had gotten close enough to validating the hypotheses, they'd make decisions to pivot, do something else. So 2 kind of different examples. Does that kind of pass our Agile litmus test, right? Lots of collaboration here at the top and the middle layers, right? People and interactions over processes and tools, responding to change over following a plan, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, working software over comprehensive documentation. I think it passes the test. As Agile's gone mass market, whether it be with Scrum or with SAFe, there's this notional idea that, oh, there's an expert and there's a book and there's a certification, there's a best practice and this is the way we do it. And the reality is that those are best practices for somebody else's company and somebody else's context and somebody else's whatever. And then somebody packages it and puts it in a certification and it becomes the way. And we have to be smart as practitioners about why this stuff works and how it gets applied, because you want to be able to change it, but you don't want to change it in a way that breaks its fundamental sets of principles and operating models. You want to change it in a way that's congruent with why it exists. Okay, I think I'm out of time, but thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it.